President Trump wants to remove deportation protection for nearly 700,000 young immigrants, and the Supreme Court will likely allow it. The hearing began this week to repeal the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, also known as DACA. It allows immigrants who were brought to America as children to legally work and attend school. More than 90% of those protected under DACA have jobs, and 45% are students. But Donald Trump says the Dreamers are bad people. He tweeted, in part, "Many of the people in DACA, no longer very young, are far from angels. Some are very tough, hardened criminals." Well, we know that that's not true because everyone protected under DACA has to pass a background check. So let's start with clearing up any misconceptions. Sophia, you're the legal expert. What exactly is DACA and what was the intent behind it?
So DACA was announced under the Obama administration in 2012 after extensive pressure from community organizers, particularly young undocumented people who were just trying to stay lawfully in the country and to not have the threat of deportation hanging over their heads constantly. Again, he wasn't super excited about it. It took community organizers to make that happen. And one of the concessions was something that you were just talking about in terms of the criminal arrest record and that kind of barring people from actually applying for DACA, which has a lot of its own complicated implications that I'm happy to talk about more. But it's not actually a pathway to citizenship. All it says is that they will not actively try to deport you. You are deferred from deportation, meaning that they're not going to target you. And also you can actually lawfully work in the United States.
So where are we with the Supreme Court rulings and proceedings?
Kind of like you just said, they had the hearing this week. Many of the community organizers and activists who pushed for it back in 2012 were actually there at the Supreme Court outside of the steps. It's exactly how you just described it. Essentially, even if the Supreme Court decides to uphold DACA, there's a strong likelihood because of the legal issues that are at play in that decision that the Trump administration will just write a longer memo rather than the shitty memo, to be honest, that they wrote to take away the protections for Dreamers and people who have been here pretty much their entire lives.
Right. And a lot of this conversation is framed around people who are members of the Latinx community. But we know that immigrants also are Black. They come from places like Africa and the Caribbean. Do you feel like those immigrants are not being considered here?
No, I think that, I've never thought about it, but yes, to your answer, I think Donald Trump really focuses on Mexican American or Mexican immigrants specifically, which is very strange. He does a lot of strange things. But I don't think that Africans, even people from Haiti, are really considered when it comes to DACA or any sort of these. And I don't know, maybe because New York is different, or, each state has their own rules and laws about immigration. So maybe it's just easier to fall under the radar in places like New York, where I think most of those immigrants live. Maybe, I don't know. I don't like to blanket statement like Donald Trump does. But I think this goes back to the Supreme Court, how important it is that we put the right people in these seats, right? Because they're going to back him because he put them there, right? And he appointed them. So it's super important. I know Brett Kavanaugh had a lot behind him in regards to the Me Too movement, but just the fact that he supported Donald Trump was an issue in the first place, that he was going to be able to sit in this seat. So it's unfortunate that that wasn't a big thing. I mean, obviously his history with women wasn't good, but also putting people in these seats are super important. The people that are put in these seats are super important.
Mm-hmm. And Derrell, we've heard from so many Dreamers who are obviously and understandably upset about this. Can you understand why?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think that when you think about Trump, he's very effective. He may go after, it may seem like he's just going after Latinx, but I think at the core of him, he upholds white supremacy. And in doing that, he is extremely effective. It's not just affecting Latinx or Mexican Americans or Mexicans in general. He is literally targeting with this super small scope of white supremacy. And because of that trickle effect, it affects so many other people. And so, I mean, he's effective at being evil.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point about generalizations, we know how he feels about African countries that are in Africa. We know how he feels about Haiti. He calls them shithole countries.
Yes.
And when he's talking about hardened criminals, he's not, first of all, he's not thinking about himself.
Right.
He doesn't consider himself a hardened criminal, even though he's we know that there was an impeachment process yesterday, and that he has done so many things that would be criminalized if he wasn't a rich white man. So the fact that he can come for immigrants for Black immigrants and say that they are hardened criminals. It's like, you don't even know what you're talking about. Like you just don't consider yourself one because of your own position in society. It's like, don't even get me started.
I love
Well, Trump says that Obama did not have the authority to enact DACA, but does Trump have the authority to dismantle it?
Well, that's kind of the legal issue. So let's also not forget that Donald Trump issued a tweet. You know, it's hard to keep up with.
Issued a tweet.
Yeah, but like
An
that's like
official tweet.
well, that's how he operates now. He gives full like political or policy memos via Twitter, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to protect the Dreamers. I'm going to protect them," and now he's saying that it's illegal. And it's like literally these are things that the Supreme Court are going to be having to consider, saying that was his decision to make this policy memo arbitrary and capricious, which is like a legal standard that's at play within the Supreme Court right now. And like his tweets are relevant to that and showing that he's like all over the place and we can't keep up with what he's actually trying to do. Right. So I mean that is an outstanding legal question, but I think what DACA also underscores is that we need to do more for people who are undocumented in this country. We need to expand DACA protections. We need to actually like have our legislature. We have a whole legislative branch that can be making it into law so that it's also a pathway to citizenship and not just like, oh, we're not going to deport you today.
But with Obama, it seems like he at least tried to take a step in the right direction.
He did.
It seemed like DACA was created to be enhanced and worked on and like played around with instead of destroyed. And when you look at something that at the core of it is good, like, yo, these people, like, yo, they're contributing to the society. Yeah. And at the core of it, it is a good thing. And when you destroy a good thing, what is the reason for it? What is the reason? Why don't you look at it and see the opportunity instead of just being hate and spreading hate?
Well, like you said, he's a white supremacist.
Yeah.
Fucking devil.
That was strong. Okay. Well, if DACA is repealed, thousands of people could be deported to countries they didn't grow up in, where they might not even speak the language, and that just seems unfair.